In Ireland, not very long ago, there were 10 Catholic convents which, behind their high walls, had laundries attached. The nuns who ran these laundries received business from the Irish Army, the state's prisons, hospitals, and even the Irish president. In addition to laundry, the nuns make money selling lace, handmade dresses, rosary beads, and embroidered religious garments, which their workforces had made. Over 10,000 girls and women were imprisoned in these laundries from 1922, the year the Irish Free State was founded, and 1996, the year the last institution closed in Dublin. They were forced to work for no pay, and they were kept in conditions which some of the women have described as barely human. Constant surveillance, locked doors, cold temperatures, minimal food, rashes and pains from constant laundry work, poor hygiene, and punishments for breaking the rules, which included hair cutting and at various times solitary confinement cells. These were what were known as Ireland's Magdalene Laundries. In February 2013, the Irish Prime Minister apologised to surviving women, and he described the institutions as our national shame. But before apologising, he acknowledged that for 90 years, Ireland has subjected these women to a profound and studied indifference. Certainly, that's the same conclusion I came to when I began to look into this issue as a law student in 2009. But so many of these women are still alive, I remember thinking, and saying to my parents on the phone from where I was in Boston to where they were in Dublin. Why has there been no apology, no investigation? What about their pensions? Do they still live in poverty? How is their health? Why have I not heard their voices I tried to understand? Why is this not in the history books? And is another generation going to finish their school curriculum without learning about it, as I did? I wondered, are we as a nation going to allow these women's experiences to have been in vain? Or are we going to ask them to help us understand the extent of what we did wrong, accept it, and learn from it so that the same can never happen again? Today I want to explore through the experiences of Magdalene survivors, how words used about us can silence us and persuade those who are open to being persuaded that we are not deserving of equal treatment and respect. I want to reflect on how words taken away from us can cause harm which lasts far longer than the silence endures. And I want to share with you the eventual power of words spoken by those who were previously silenced to expose and confront abuse that has gone before. I have had the enormous privilege of conveying testimonies of women who spend time in Ireland's Magdalene Laundries to the UN Committee Against Torture in Geneva, the UN Human Rights Council and the Irish Human Rights Commission, and of watching those testimonies spark a national and international debate about what happened in a language so different to the language that was used against them in the past. The language of human rights was and is theirs. And really the thought I want to share with you today is what I believe is the special, in fact the real power of human rights as a language when it is spoken by the people who were previously silenced. Of course there are circumstances where survivors of human rights abuse want or sometimes need others to speak on their behalf. But I think we as human rights advocates need to make every effort, wherever there is someone who wants to speak alongside and not instead, and to ensure that theirs is the loudest voice heard. So to return to a time when Ireland's Magdalene Laundries were in existence, and some of the words used as labels to justify a system that confined and exploited girls as young as 9 and women as old as 89. These are a few of those words as remembered by the women. I was being abused when I was younger. I don't know how many times I went to the police and told them what was going on. The nuns told me it was my fault I was in there. They said I made behavioural suggestions towards my father. I think it was being illegitimate. Priests had no mercy for anything like that, none, and you were reminded of it in the convent as well. All she ever told us was we were in for our sins. And the words of the 1923 Local Government Act. Unmarried mothers are divided into two classes. A, first offenders, to be dealt with in the same institution as children. B, old offenders, to be sent to the Magdalene Asylum. Now, on top of those words being hurled their way, the girls and women in the Magdalene Laundries were not allowed to speak. There was a rule of silence, which allowed only for prayer. They were allowed no contact with the outside world. Letters were censored in and out. Even their names were taken away. I was one of the lucky ones that got out, but that time left haunting nightmares in my head. When we were in the laundry, it was constant work, and you weren't allowed to talk, and if we were caught, you'd get a wallop on the back with a stick or a belt, so you'd be told to silence. Talking was the devil's work, and all that, you know what I mean, all this kind of trash. You did not dare speak to the nuns. They were like royalty. You would have been cheeky if you'd asked. They would have said, what, it was insubordination. How dare you? You were actually frightened. You were frightened to ask for your money. I didn't know where I was for a few minutes, and all they were talking about was, what shall we call her? And I keep saying, I'm Anne-Marie. And then they said, oh no, we can't call her Anne. No, or Anne-Marie, we've got a Marie. I know, let's call her Elizabeth. The effect of these words and the deprivation of words which permeated the girls and women's incarceration and forced labour is described by some of the women. Whatever walk you take in life, you always felt an outsider. You never seemed to fit in. It was very hard to hold relationships, I think, because you always felt nervous, frightened, scared. It's like you were someone in the background. You'd wish that the ground would open up and swallow you. You didn't want to be noticed. You know, you shied away a lot. I used to live a kind of false life. My face used to smile, pretending everything was okay. But I was so nervous inside, and you couldn't tell anybody. You wanted to be like everybody else, but you couldn't be like everybody else. And you know, in a way, you were so ashamed to say you were in the convent to some people, because it's a stigma. It's a stigma. You mean nothing to them. You're nothing. The thing is now, if I was 18 now, I would give them a mouthful. But you don't learn. I was so frightened. I was going to write to the nun when I left Limerick, to the head nun, and ask her why I didn't get paid for the work I did in the laundry. And I thought, if I do, you know, they'll try and bring me back there. I just got that feeling. Having heard those few words, you now have an idea of some of the testimony which reached the UN Committee Against Torture in May 2011. Although the Irish government was aware of documents available in public archives showing deep state involvement with the laundries, its official line when it met with the UN Committee Against Torture was that this all happened a very long time ago. It would be very difficult to rewrite history, and as far as the state was concerned, the vast majority of women had entered the laundries voluntarily. But the government's words were met by the women's, and this is what some of their testimonies said. You knew all those doors were locked, and you knew damn well that if you made that escape, if you were lucky to make it, unless you got onto the back of a laundry van or something like that to escape, there was no way out. And if you did make that escape, then the law would bring you back. The guard would bring you back. So they had you. You couldn't get out of there. Then I had this bright idea. I was 22, I was 4 years there then, and I said to Marie, right, you work in the laundry. Try and get a couple of dresses for me and for yourself, yeah? And we won't go to supper that night. I've got migraine and you've got a bad stomach, okay? This was the plan. We were going to run away, the two of us. And I knew that the outside door into the sewing room was locked, but this night, somehow, they forgot to lock it. So while they were all having supper, we were supposed to be up in bed, as we were sick, but we weren't. We went down the little alleyway, down from the workroom, all the way into Cork City. Yes, we ran all the way. And when we got to the city, Marie said, I'm going in on the fruit machines. I might find some money in the slots. Because we had no money. And this bloody great big guard come along and he said, hello, what's your name? Because they'd heard that there was 2 girls missing from the convent. The bells ring out, don't they, right? All hell let loose. The nuns ring the church bells and they get hold of the guards, you know? And they're on the lookout. What else could we do except go into the city? Because we were quite near the city. He said, you're from that big house up the road, aren't you? Of course, that was it. I started crying and they brought me back. The UN Committee Against Torture responded to these words with a formal recommendation that the Irish government immediately carry out an independent and thorough investigation into the Magdalene Laundries abuse, and that it ensure that the women obtain redress to include the means for as full rehabilitation as possible. Less than 2 weeks after that happened, the Irish government established a governmental investigation into state involvement, and this ultimately led to the Prime Minister's apology on the 19th of February 2013. After the apology, the government announced a restorative justice scheme which promised the women pensions, compensation, healthcare, and a memorial. Some of the women have received their compensation, but all are still waiting for pensions and healthcare. No legislation has been introduced yet to provide independent representation to the women who still live with the nuns to this day. There still has not been an independent investigation into the full extent of the Magdalene Laundries abuse, and the 4 religious orders who ran the laundries have refused to apologise and have refused several requests from the government to contribute to the compensation scheme. So there is still a lot to do for Ireland to meet its human rights obligations towards Magdalene Laundries survivors. But what I want to leave you with today is the idea that it was the women's own words that succeeded in challenging the indifference, the excuses and claimed justifications, and the ongoing maltreatment resulting from their time in the Magdalene Laundries. As has been the case with the Magdalene Laundries, it is the lived experience of survivors of so-called historical abuse that challenges the notion, the very notion of it being historical. How can torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment be historical when every day that it remains uninvestigated and every day that redress continues to be denied is another day that survivors live with the consequences? I said at the beginning of this talk that I believe human rights as a language is at its most powerful when spoken by the people who were previously silenced. Listening to the women, I am sure, has made me a better lawyer, and it has changed me as a person. I have never met with more dignity, understanding and compassion as I have when I have spoken with women in the UK and Ireland who spent time in Magdalene Laundries. As human rights advocates, I think it's only by listening that we can do justice through our work to those who have survived abuse. And it's only by listening that we can seek restorative justice in a manner that does good and hopefully never further harm. And for all of us, it's only by listening that we can all fully understand the importance of dignity and equality and what it means to have those rights taken away. Thank you.